It was just after dawn when two bleary-eyed joggers stumbled to a stop on the high school track in Fall River, Massachusetts. In the grey morning light of October the 13th, 1979, they saw a shape under the bleachers, a crumpled form that should not have been there. As they drew closer, dread washed over them. It was the body of a young woman. She lay face down on the cold ground, wrists bound by fishing line, her head battered and blooded. The girl had been sexually assaulted and brutally beaten to death. I'm Sarah Powell, and this is Obscurata, because some stories have no ending. In a town mostly known for its textile mills and working-class neighbourhoods, the horrific discovery sent a ripple of fear through Fall River. Police identified the victim as 17-year-old Doreen Leveska, a runaway from nearby New Bedford, who had been supporting herself through sex work. Investigators initially assumed Doreen's killer might be one of her clients, perhaps a John who turned violent. But as the medical examiner noted the extent of her injuries, multiple skull fractures, stab wounds to the head, a darker possibility emerged. More than one person had attacked Doreen, suggesting a group crime, perhaps even something ritualistic. Whispers began to spread that something evil had come to their city. In the weeks after Doreen's murder, Fall River's police struggled to find solid leads. Downtown, where Doreen had last been seen alive, street informants spoke quietly about strange gatherings and devil worship, but hard evidence was scarce. Detectives learned that on the night before her body was found, Doreen had been out on the streets with another sex worker, looking for clients. Some witnesses recalled seeing the petite brunette in a drunken stupor in the red light district of Pleasant Street. But no one seemed to know who had left her broken body under the high school bleachers. Investigations stalled without arrest. For a time, Doreen's murder was an isolated horror, a brutal mystery with no answer. Then another young woman disappeared on the night of November the 7th, 1979. 19-year-old Barbara Raposa, a single mother and named sex worker, never returned to pick up her son from the babysitter. Her frantic father reported Barbara missing the next day. Barbara had last been seen getting dropped off in downtown Fall River to work the stroll, much as Doreen had. Weeks passed with no sign of her. The cold autumn gave way to a bitter new year, and that winter, the police received a strange offer of help. Barbara's boyfriend, a man named Andy Maltese, began contacting detectives, not with information about Barbara's whereabouts, but with bizarre tales about a satanic cult operating in Fall Rivers. Maltese, a known drug user, claimed he had special knowledge that could solve Doreen's murder. At first, he denied knowing anything, but days later, he changed his story dramatically. He told police he'd seen Barbara's fate in a psychic dream, a claim he made to explain how he knew where to find her body. Curious and desperate, investigators took Maltese up on his offer. He guided them to a wooded area on the outskirts of the city on January the 26th, 1980. There, just as Maltese had foretold, they found Barbara's remains. Snow dusted the ground, but beneath it lay the decomposed body of the missing woman. She had been bound hand and foot, and her skull had been crushed. Another young sex worker, murdered like Doreen. Chillingly, Maltese seemed to know exactly how and where Barbara had been killed. He described the position of her body, the time and method of her death, and other details that police never released publicly. His so-called dream was far too accurate to be mere coincidence. Faced with this insight, police arrested Auntie Maltese on February the 7th, 1980, for Barbara's murder. The truth was far more ordinary and disturbing than a psychic vision. Maltese had been with Barbara the night she vanished. Investigators would later suspect he killed her in a rage, possibly over infidelity. By invoking whispers of occult and devil worship, Maltese had unwittingly stirred the cauldron of fear bubbling in Fall River. 2 murdered women in 3 months was terrifying enough. The suggestion of a satanic cult stalking the city's most vulnerable added a new level of horror. By now, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Both Doreen and Barbara had lived on the margins, young women involved in sex work and drugs, navigating Fall River's underworld of pimps and street hustlers. They also travelled in the same circles, frequenting the same seedy bars and late-night hangouts. And in that small world, one name kept coming up. Carl Drew, a 26-year-old pimp who ruled his turf on Bedford Street with an iron fist. Carl Drew was a burly man from New Hampshire with a violent reputation, the kind of figure who inspired both fear and loyalty among the runaways and addicts who worked for him. In the autumn of 1979, Doreen had reportedly started seeing Carl Drew for protection, and Barbara too was connected to the same criminal milieu. Drew wasn't just a pimp. Some said he was also the leader of a weird occult group. Rumours swirled that he presided over secret ceremonies in the dark woods outside town, where sex workers and drug dealers gathered to worship the devil. To those who knew him, Carl Drew fancied himself a satanic kingpin. Many who toiled for Drew were terrified of him. In fact, shortly after Doreen's murder, one of Drew's girls, 20-year-old Karen Marsden, confided to police that she was certain who killed Doreen. She was too frightened to say the name aloud, but she called him the devil. She begged the officers for protection, convinced that if she betrayed this person, it would cost Karen her life. Karen Marsden had reason to be afraid. Like Doreen and Barbara, Karen was a young sex worker on Fall River streets. By early 1980, she was also a key witness, one of the only people talking to police about these murders. Karen hinted that a cult led by Carl Drew was behind it all. Detectives met with her multiple times through late 1979 and into January 1980. Each time, Karen was skittish and paranoid. She spoke of attending devil worship meetings with Drew and other sex workers, describing crude rituals and bloodletting. She admitted she had been present on the night Doreen was killed, and that it was no ordinary murder, but a diabolic ritual to sacrifice Doreen's soul to Satan. According to Karen, and corroborated later by another girl, Robin Murphy, Carl Drew had slaughtered Doreen in front of them as a satanic offering. In the aftermath, Karen was desperate to escape Drew's clutches. She fled the area for a time, and even moved in with Robin Murphy and another friend to hide from him. But Drew's reach was long. He sent word out on the street that Karen Marsden was a traitor. He told one acquaintance that, in the right time and the right place, he was going to kill Karen. By February 1980, Karen knew it was only a matter of time before the devil came for her. On the night of February the 8th, 1980, Karen Marsden's worst fears came true. Earlier that evening, she had been nervously cruising around downtown Fall River in a car with two friends, 17-year-old Robin Murphy and 21-year-old Carol Fletcher. Robin, like Karen, was a sex worker, tangled up in Carl Drew's world. Despite her youth, Robin had a hard edge and a keen instinct for survival. She had been Karen's roommate and lover, and she knew exactly why Karen was terrified. As the three women drove along Bedford Street, Carl Drew suddenly appeared and got into the car, accompanied by a tall, quiet friend of his named Carl Davis. The atmosphere in the car turned electric with fear. Drew was eerily calm. He told Carol to keep driving out of the city, down dark back roads, all the way to a secluded spot locals called Family Beach in the neighbouring town of Westport. What happened in those woods by the frozen Westport River is the stuff of nightmares, and much of it comes from Robin Murphy's later testimony, which would both shock and divide the community. According to Robin, Carl Drew and the others had brought Karen there for a final ritual. In Robin's account, Drew dragged Karen out of the car, but when Karen broke into a panicked run, he barked an order at Robin. "Get her." Robin said she obeyed out of fear. She seized Karen by the throat and hair and dragged the pleading woman into the trees. Drew walked alongside, steady and cold, while Carl Davis and Carol Fletcher trailed close behind. On a carpet of dead leaves, under the pale moon, the chase ended. Carol Drew and Robin Murphy set upon Karen with rocks, striking her again and again. Karen's screams cut through the winter night, until Drew silenced her by forcing Robin to slit her friend's throat. Trembling and covered in blood, Robin did as she was told. But the carnage was not over. In a frenzy of violence, Drew allegedly grabbed hold of Karen's head and, as Robin later described in court, tore it from her body. He then kicked the severed head like a macabre trophy. The murder of Karen was, by all accounts, exceptionally brutal, even in the context of these already brutal crimes. And And if Robin's story was true, it was also a carefully staged satanic sacrifice. She claimed that as Karen lay dying, Carl Drew invoked Satan's name, declaring that Karen was being killed because she wanted to leave the cult, and that her soul was now offered to the devil. Karen vanished that night. For weeks, no one knew for certain what had happened to her. She was simply another missing person. But those who had been at Family Beach knew the gruesome truth. It wasn't until April 1980 that partial remains were found and identified as Karen's. A piece of her skull turned up in the woods, discovered by chance by passers-by, and nearby there were scraps of clothing, clumps of hair, and blood-stained rocks marking the scene of a nightmare. Karen's body had been dismembered and scattered. Most of it was never recovered. The evidence confirmed what Fall River's rumour mill had been saying for months. A devil-worshipping cult had been hunting women in their town. By now, the press had caught wind of the sensational story. Headlines blared about satanic cult murder and lurid details of occult rituals in the woods. The Fall River police, under pressure to stop the carnage, moved swiftly to round up those implicated in Karen's killing. In May 1980, Carl Drew, Robin Murphy, and Carl Davis were indicted for the murder of Karen. The circle of depravity seemed to be closing in on a core group of 3. The trials that followed became a media circus, one of the earliest high-profile cases of ritualistic killings in America, arriving just as the country was entering the throes of 1980s satanic panic. In the courtroom, prosecutors painted a nightmarish picture of a satanic cult operating among the city's pimps and sex workers. According to the state's theory, drawn heavily from Robin Murphy's testimony, Carl Drew was the ringleader of this cult, a man who used satanic fear to exert control over the women who worked for him. The 3 murdered women were presented not as isolated victims of street violence, but as sacrifices in Drew's twisted rituals. Jurors heard how Doreen's murder back in October had allegedly been the first cult killing, a rite to initiate members and bind them in blood. Witnesses claimed that Doreen was killed in a ceremonial fashion with multiple participants, and that Karen Marsden had been forced to watch as Doreen died, effectively sealing Karen's own fate as the next offering. They testified that devil worship ceremonies were routinely held in Fall River, complete with altars, chants, and bloodletting. One police officer even claimed to have observed bizarre occult gatherings in the city during the investigation. But nothing was more disturbing than the account of Karen's death. In graphic detail, Robin Murphy described the events of that February night. She confessed to the court that, under Drew's orders, she had engaged in acts of necrophilia with Karen's remains. A detail so grotesque, it left the courtroom in stunned silence. This was hell on earth, the prosecution argued, and Carl Drew was its devil. Supporting Robin's account, another young woman, Carol Fletcher, the driver that night, took the stand and confirmed much of the ritual narrative. Carol testified that she had indeed driven the group out to the Westport woods and witnessed the unholy ritual slaughter of Karen. with Drew presiding and Carl Davis also present as a participant. There was even testimony that Drew had later bragged of the killing to his girlfriend, gleefully recounting how he had murdered a girl who tried to leave his cult, and how he wanted her to feel pain. With evidence like this, the jury was convinced that an organised satanic cult was behind the Fall River murders. In the end, Carl Drew was convicted of first-degree murder for Karen's death in March 1981 and sentenced to life in prison with no parole. His co-defendant Robin Murphy struck a deal. Just 17 years old at the time of the killings, Robin had been both a witness and participant. She agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in Karen's case, in exchange for a lighter sentence and her testimony against Drew. Robin was handed a life sentence with the possibility of parole. As part of the deal, prosecutors did not charge her in the other murders. The third person accused, Carl Davis, never stood trial. The case against him unravelled due to lack of corroboration and his refusal to talk. He invoked the Fifth Amendment and stayed silent. Ultimately, Davis walked free on the murder charge, though not without incident. In a bizarre postscript, Carl Davis was arrested about a year later for attacking a woman who had spoken to police about the cult. That woman was Maureen Sonny Spada, a former sex worker and sometime occult dabbler, who had dared to tell authorities that she suspected Robin Murphy, not Carl Drew, had killed Karen. Davis viciously assaulted Spada, stabbing her in the head, apparently to keep her quiet. Reports say he later assaulted a woman connected to the case and later died of a drug overdose in 2000. To the public, Carl Davis's violent loyalty only reinforced the story that had been spun at trial. The dark cult of Fall River was real, and it was willing to spill blood to guard its secrets. With convictions in place, it seemed the nightmare was over. Andy Maltese, the man who killed Barbara Raposa, had already been convicted of her murder and sent away for life in early 1981. Carl Drew would likely die behind bars, and Robin Murphy, the precocious teenager cultist turned star witness, was locked up, though with the tantalising prospect of parole someday. Drew and Murphy were convicted only in connection with Karen Marsden's death, while Maltese was convicted separately for Barbara's murder. Doreen's killer was never formally identified. By the mid-1980s, the Fall River murders became a cautionary tale, an early harbinger of a nationwide panic. As America's satanic panic era gained momentum, this case was often cited as proof that devil worship cults lurked everywhere, even in a blue-collar Massachusetts town. The legend took on a life of its own. People whispered that more cult members had been involved than those caught, that perhaps other unsolved crimes might be linked to the same shadowy order. In the town's imagination, Fall River's forests were alive with hooded Satanists and blood rituals, a horror story that felt all too plausible in those years. But as time went on, doubts and contradictions began to surface. The tidy narrative of a lone evil mastermind and his cult followers started to fray at the edges. In 1984, only a few years after helping put Carl Drew away, Robin Murphy suddenly recanted her entire story. Appearing in a bid to win a new trial for herself, she claimed that she had lied about everything. There had been no real satanic cult, she said. At least not the murderous coven she'd described. Robin now maintained that Carl Drew had not killed Karen at all. She claimed she wasn't even present at Karen's death. Robin told officials that at 17, she'd been frightened and manipulated by police and prosecutors. She believed Carl Drew was dangerous to society, she explained, and figured if pinning the murder on him kept him locked up, it was worth it. As for Andre Maltese, Barbara's killer, Robin alleged that he had sexually abused her, so she had reasons to want him punished too. Essentially, Robin Murphy admitted to making herself an instrument of the system. She said she wove a satanic horror story because it was what the authorities wanted to hear, and because it ensured the two men she hated would go to prison. Robin Murphy's startling reversal was just the beginning. Over the years, several other witnesses have come forward to contradict their original testimonies. Carol Fletcher, the driver who backed up Robin's account of the ritual killing, later claimed that police coerced her into lying. She said detectives threatened her with charges unless she confirmed the cult narrative. Now, Carol insists that the murder didn't even happen in the Westport woods, as originally claimed. Instead, she says Karen was killed elsewhere, perhaps in Fall River itself, and that it was Robin Murphy who killed her, not Carl Drew. According to this revised version, Robin acted alone or with minimal help, and then dismembered Karen's body and scattered the remains to cover her tracks. These recantations cast a shadow of uncertainty over the case. Could it be that the entire satanic cult story was a fabrication, the product of a frightened teenager's imagination and the fevered climate of the times? Even some law enforcement officials have shifted their perspective. Paul Carey, a detective sergeant from the Fall River Police, who worked on the original investigation, eventually voiced his own theory. "I still believe that Murphy was the real ringleader, not Drew," he said bluntly. Carey came to suspect that jealousy and personal vendettas were the true motives behind the murders, not devil worship. In his view, Robin Murphy was in love with Doreen and grew enraged when Doreen started cozying up to Carl Drew. Perhaps, Carey speculated, Robin killed Doreen out of jealousy during a confrontation, and Karen witnessed it, making Karen a liability. Similarly, he believed Robin had reason to kill Barbara as well. Barbara was romantically involved with Andy Maltese, and Robin and Barbara had their own past love affair that ended bitterly. To Detective Carey, the pattern was clear. Robin Murphy, he theorised, murdered Doreen, Barbara and Karen for personal reasons, and then spun a fantastical tale of satanic rituals to mislead the police and ensure her rivals and abusers were blamed. So who truly killed the Fall River women? Was Carl Drew the devil incarnate or a convenient scapegoat? The truth, shrouded by decades of rumour and recantation, remains frustratingly elusive. What is certain is that 3 young women lost their lives in vicious fashion, and those who were there have never told a consistent story. The early 1980s were a peculiar time in America, a time when even seasoned investigators were primed to see Satan's hand in every dark crime. In that atmosphere, the Fall River murders became an early flashpoint of the Satanic Panic, complete with black mass allegations and witches' covens in the woods. It captivated and horrified the public. But perhaps the most frightening aspect is how thin the line between truth and myth became. Were occult forces truly at work in Fall River? Or did the idea of a satanic cult provide cover for more human horrors like jealousy, abuse, and opportunism? Decades later, Robin Murphy, the only living person who might really know the answer, still hasn't given a straight story. Paroled in 2004 after serving 24 years, she violated her release and returned to prison, all the while alternately proclaiming her guilt, then innocent, then guilt again. At a 2017 parole hearing, witnesses described Robin as cunning and manipulative, someone who savagely beat and brutalised 3 young women, and then lied about it. The parole board, sceptical of Robin's ever-changing narrative, denied her freedom, noting that she hadn't truly come clean. As of 2024, Robin Murphy has been granted parole again, after multiple denials over the years. The tale of Fall River's murders is a grim mosaic of fact and fear, one that leaves us with unsettling questions. In the end, perhaps there was a cult in Fall River, but not the kind depicted in the horror movies. Instead, it may have been a cult of personality and paranoia, a lethal mix of vulnerable young lives bound together by desperation, drugs, and dark fantasy. Our Drew remains in prison to this day, still protesting his innocence and fighting for access to old case files that he believes might clear his name. Some in Fall River believe him, convinced that the real mastermind got away with murder. Others remain certain that justice was served back in 1981, that Drew was indeed the devil who demanded human sacrifice, and that Robin Murphy was both victim and villain. 4 decades later, the streets and woods where these rituals allegedly occurred have long gone quiet. But this story endures. The Fall River cult murders show how easily truth can be obscured by terror, and how an ordinary industrial town became, for a brief time, hunting ground for our darkest nightmares. And that's the end of this story. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/The Whispering Woods, where if you subscribe for £2.50 a month to the Obscurata tier, you can listen ad-free. For £4.50, you can listen to this podcast and our other podcast, The Whispering Woods. And we're also on Apple Premium, where for £4.99 a month, you can listen ad-free to both podcasts. I want to say a quick thank you to Rog for fact-checking and editing. And as always, stay curious and sleep with the lights on, just in case.